Musical evocations of water are common in 19th century piano repertoire. Although surface conventions to evoke water involve a variety of musical features, manipulation of hypermeter through phrase extension is a common thread that can be traced through pieces evoking water. In this paper, I will show how manipulation of hypermeter plays a vital role in musical meaning, where musical structure and surface textures are bound and organized on a temporal plane. Through a case study of water referential pieces by Frédéric Chopin, Fanny Mendelssohn Hensel, and Franz Schubert, I will show that disruption and manipulation of hypermeter plays a key role in evoking characteristics of flowing, unpredictable, and often tempestuous waters. For an overview of this presentation, the first part of the presentation will be a literature review. I will use Raymond Monell's work to begin defining the water icon and the relationship between musical topics and icons. I will then discuss Kofi Agawu's arguments concerning the interplay between topics and deep structure, which seem to build directly off of Karl Schachter's studies of rhythm and linear analysis. I will then look more closely at Schachter's analysis of Frédéric Chopin's Prelude Opus 28, number 3 in G major, and discuss this piece's historical associations with water. I will then apply Schachter's approach to 3 other pieces, also incorporating Lerdahl and Jackendoff's meter and grouping preference rules, to produce tonal and hypermetrical analyses conveying the relationship between harmonic structure, the water icon, and hypermeter. In Raymond Monell's The Sense of Music, he defines a musical icon as a sign that resembles its object. Icons are distinguished from topics in that icons do not have a singular expressive convention for signification, though topics themselves can be iconic, such as in the way that the pianto, the motive of a falling minor second, resembles a sigh. The water icon is one of the most common musical icons, found in the music of Bach and even in opera. In Kofi Agawu's Playing with Signs, he demonstrates through Schenkerian analysis that musical topics, residing at the surface of the music, are dependent upon the music's underlying harmonic structure. Because topics have no syntax, the logical appearance of topics is governed by the tonal motions of the music's temporal deep structure. Agawu argues that the point of a semiotic analysis is to provide an account of a piece in which the domains of expression, which Agawu refers to as extroversive semiosis, are integrated with those of structure, which are referred to as introversive semiosis. Here, Agawu connects introversive semiosis to harmony and extroversive semiosis to topic. The overlap of these two modes of semiosis is what Agawu refers to as play. Though water is an icon and not considered a topic, as stated previously, topics themselves can be iconic. Because iconic referential material animates the surface of the music, Agawu's arguments concerning the interplay between the tonal structure and the musical surface are still applicable. Agawu's arguments are also strongly linked to Schachter's ideas of rhythm and linear analysis. In the first of 3 articles where Schachter explores the relationship between rhythm and linear analysis, Schachter argues that changes in texture, dynamics, and timbre can produce accents and groupings, ideas that are further explored in Lerdahl and Jackendoff's A Generative Theory of Tonal Music and their grouping preference and Wolfram-Innis rules. Schachter also states that surface rhythms result from durational and tonal elements acting in combination, the main unifying factor between Schachter's work and Agawu's work. In his second article, Schachter shows how meter can be organized on a small scale and on a large scale. The metrical stress patterns within a measure of 4/4 is strong weak, strong weak. Just as a single measure ends with a weak accent on beat 4, phrases do as well, where the final tonic of a phrase is normally not accented. This strong weak relationship within a measure is then extended to groups of measures, forming hypermeasures, then downbeats of hypermeasures, until an entire piece is organized as patterns of strong weak on multiple hierarchical levels. In his final article on the subject, Schachter states that for duration to become even a moderately important issue in a piece, its pattern of metrical stresses must become intelligible to the listener. In order for manipulation of hypermeter to become aurally noticeable by the listener, first, persistent hypermetric patterns must emerge. These relationships must be inferred by the listener out of patterns of long and short, of loud and soft, of repetition and change, of voice leading and harmony, of all these elements and others in any imaginable combination. Schachter puts these theories concerning meter and hypermeter into practice in his analysis of Frédéric Chopin's Prelude Opus 28, number 3. In his analysis, Schachter uses his method of durational reduction to reveal connections between durational and tonal organization. Durational reduction combines the ideas of a Schenkerian reduction of a texture with duration, an element of Schenkerian sketches that is usually absent, by, quote, indicating tonal events in durational proportion, end quote. Schachter argues that these sorts of analyses are valuable for revealing higher-level metrical organization of bars, or hypermeasures. In his analysis of Opus 28, number 3, Schachter shows this piece as essentially being a parallel interrupted period, where a half cadence is reached at the end of the antecedent phrase, shown with the railroad tracks, and ending with a perfect authentic cadence. In this durational reduction, Schachter uses the unit of a quarter note to represent a single bar of music, where bar lines denote hypermeasures. This makes the phrase structure of the piece abundantly clear. The first sketch is a foreground sketch using durational reduction notation, where every bar of the piece is represented. In the lower graph, Schachter eliminates the 2 bars of introduction at the beginning of the piece and the 6 bars of coda at the end of the piece, where there is essentially no harmonic motion. The elimination of these harmonically static bars helps Schachter reduce the piece into a parallel interrupted period. Here, his reduction shows that the 2 halves of the period are asymmetrical. In the lower sketch, Schachter shows the antecedent phrase as taking up 8 measures, represented in 2 whole notes, or 8 quarter notes, which would equal 8 measures. While one would typically expect the consequent phrase to be the same length as the antecedent, Schachter's reduction shows that the consequent phrase is extended to double the length of the antecedent phrase, due to the transformation of the tonic in bar 16 into a 5-7-4 by adding a 7th. Schachter argues that the extending of the consequent phrase allows Chopin to end with a strong cadence that would not normally occur in a 16-bar period, where the final tonic would be hypermetrically weak. Thus, Chopin is able to clarify the tonal function of the prolonged 5-7-4 as prolonging the predominant of the phrase. The tonic is not undermined by its transformation into a dominant 7th chord due to that final tonic being ends accented, shown in the last hypermetrical group, where the dominant is on a strong beat 1 and the final tonic is on a strong beat 3. Let's now listen while following along to this graphic representation of the measure groupings in harmonic structure. As you may have noticed, right after Chopin has established 4-bar groupings in the antecedent, he adds an extra bar, extending the antecedent by a measure. Then, the consequent phrase is extended to nearly double the length of the antecedent. In addition to Schachter's assertion that the extension of the consequent phrase serves to clarify the function of the 5-7-4 as part of the predominant function of the phrase, these phrase extensions also evoke the water icon present on the music surface. Despite not having a program, this piece has been associated with water on numerous occasions. In French pianist Alfred Cortot's working edition of these preludes, he calls this prelude the Song of the Stream. Byron Almain's narrative analysis of this piece also acknowledges the water-like qualities of the piece, interpreting them as an index or a larger metaphor for harmony with nature. Overall, these hypermetrical extensions to the halves of the period phrase portray the play between the musical surface and the underlying harmonic structure, further evoking the piece's associations with water, uncontainable and flowing. I will now apply this notion of play concerning hypermeter to a few of my own analyses. As Schachter argues, in order for irregularities in hypermeter to become aurally noticeable, first, persistent repetition of normative units must appear. Thus, it is typical for pieces with hypermetric irregularities to begin with normative hypermeter, typically structured in groups of 4 bars. This scheme is seen in Fanny Mendelssohn Hensel's September am Flusse at the River, from her set of piano pieces Das Jahr. Not only is the hypermeter persistent and normative throughout the first 2 pages, so is the harmony. Let's listen. From the beginning, Hensel sets up persistent two-measure groupings that are extended to four-measure groupings, notated using the numbers above the staff. There are also parallelisms established between the groups due to the arrival of tonic at the beginning of each four-measure group. This elision of four-bar hypermeasures also evokes flowing water, as each phrase flows seamlessly into the next. Soon, after these groups are established, the hypermeter is disrupted. The pattern of resolution being placed at the beginning of the hypermetric phrase has created an expectation for the listener. Let's listen to how Hensel begins to manipulate the listener's expectations of resolution and phrasing, starting right where we left off. As you just heard, after starting a new hypermetric group in measure 17 and prolonging tonic, the listener expects a return to tonic at the end of measure 20 to match the end of measure 18. However, instead, the listener encounters a 3-chord, which then goes to a secondary dominant at the beginning of measure 21. These harmonic motions effectively extend the phrase group to 6 measures, further solidified by the repetition of the interior C-sharp-D C-sharp melody of the right hand in measure 20 and 21. Hensel has just started to manipulate the hypermetric groupings through toying with the listener's expectation of resolution. After this point, the piece begins to modulate for the start of the contrasting middle section to a very distantly related key, flat minor 4, E flat minor. These phrase extensions continue through these sections, now accompanied by unexpected tonicizations and distant modulations. Let's pick back up at the beginning of the return of A, following a common tone modulation from E flat minor to B minor. Though a listener may expect the return of the A section to also be accompanied by the initial A section's four-measure groupings, Hensel once again defies the listener's expectations. In this final section, the harmonization of numerous chromatic descending lines causes unexpected resolutions to applied chords, many of which come early and disrupt the hypermeter. Let's listen. Hensel's unexpected resolutions and interjections of new melodic material, accompanied by swirling descending chromatic lines, all evoke tempestuous waters. The hypermeter of these phrases is caught up in these choppy waters, where the play between the melody of the musical surface and the unexpected harmonic motions lead to choppy hypermetric groupings. These characteristics together embody the unpredictability of water. I will now explore these hypermetric phenomena associated with water icons in piano repertoire to a piece of vocal music, Franz Schubert's Auf dem Flusse from Winterreise. In this seventh song of the cycle, the protagonist finds himself at a familiar stream. However, now that it is in the middle of winter, the merrily flowing river from the springtime has developed a thick layer of ice at the surface. Mourning his lost battle for the girl he had hoped to marry, he takes a stone and carves the name of the girl onto the ice in remembrance of his love. He reminisces about the first time he met her and the last time he saw her, as despair wells up inside him. The speaker sees himself in the brook. My heart, do you now recognize your image in this brook? Is there not beneath its crust likewise a seething torrent? Just as the waters continue to thrash underneath the brook's frozen layer of ice, the protagonist feels a torrent of emotion underneath the thick crust that his heart has developed. One poetic device within the poem that Schubert exploits in his setting is juxtaposition. The protagonist remembers the stream being lively and boisterous, but it is now still and cold, just as he remembers himself in the throes of love and now in the throes of heartache. These juxtapositions are seen through Schubert's frequent modulations from E minor to D sharp minor, where the leading tone becomes the new tonic, and E major, the parallel key of E minor. Let's listen to how Schubert sets the text while paying attention to his employment of periodic hypermeter.
Du so lustig rauschtest, du heller wilder Fluss, wie still bist du geworden, gibst keinen Scheidegruß. Mit harter, starrer Rinde hast du dich überdeckt.
As seen at the beginning of this stave, an extra measure is added between stanzas in order to modulate back to E minor. This extra added measure disrupts the 4-bar hypermeter that Schubert established from the beginning of the song. Here, these fast-moving 16th notes, accompanied by an increased harmonic rhythm, foreshadow the seething torrent beneath the ice. This interrupting measure is present between the second and third stanza as well, this time used to modulate to E major, setting the protagonist reminiscing on his first meeting with his love and carving her name into the ice. Because the third and fourth stanza stay in the key of E major, there is no need for the disruptive intervening bar, as there is no need to modulate. Thus, the verses set in major have consistent hypermetric groupings until near the end of the fourth stanza, where the protagonist begins to come back to reality that his love is no longer his love. Here again, as the protagonist comes back to reality, the hypermeter is disrupted in order to modulate back to E minor, so that the protagonist can confront the brook that has been seething underneath him. At the last stanza of text, the melodic line from the voice has been swapped into the piano. The sloshing of waves underneath the ice in the right hand is now being directly compared to the protagonist's inner feelings. Here, where the protagonist confronts the similarities between himself and the brook, the hypermeter again is disrupted.
Mein Herz in diesem Bache erkennst du nun dein Bild, ob's unter seiner Rinde wohl auch so reißend schwillt, ob's wohl auch so reißend schwillt, mein Herz in diesem Bach.
In this last stanza and its repetition, the most hypermetric disruptions occur. Whereas before, the extra measures were used to modulate, here they are not. Just as the protagonist equates himself with the seething torrent under the ice, the manipulation of hypermeter not only reflects the chaos under the surface, but also evokes the meaning of the text. In conclusion, hypermeter is one element of play between harmony and the surface that can evoke extra musical references to water portrayed in the music, where the hypermetric disruption portrays tempestuous, unpredictable bodies of water. Further research on this topic may include looking at music from an earlier era, as all of these examples were from Romantic era composers. Thank you.